Hello, everyone, and welcome to 1138, where we are celebrating 50 years of Lucasfilm. I'm Taylor Goodson. I'm the commanding officer of the Northeast Remnant here in New Jersey, and I'm here with Justin. Hi, Justin.
Hi, I'm Justin Sonfield. I am BH74711, and I am the XO of the Northeast Remnant Garrison. And we're here today to introduce you guys to an amazing talent in the Star Wars universe and other universes that we are all very familiar with, Michael Giacchino. The best way to talk about him is to show you what he has done.
Come to Papa.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming a true talent, a 501st Legion honorary member, and a native New Jerseyan, Michael Giacchino.
Hello.
It's such
weird, when you do these things over Zoom. There's like, and you make these announcements and pronouncements, and then there's no reaction. You're like, oh, the crowd hated it. Oh well. I'm gonna switch my glasses there. That's better.
So,
hey, how are you doing?
Great. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
I'm doing great. It's good to see you.
Excellent. So we had such an amazing time talking with you back in August of last year, and we're so thankful to you for taking the time out, your busy schedule, to meet with the members of the 501st Legion, especially now as we celebrate these awesome 50 years of Lucasfilm. But before we dive into all that, how have you been doing? It's a different world now since last August. So what's been keeping you busy?
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, the last year, all the movies that I was supposed to work on sort of, as you can probably guess, just got pushed into who knows when, they would get finished. Everything got postponed and paused. And so during that whole pause, I just sort of, I wrote an album. I put out an album of music that I've been wanting to do for so long. And it's right here. You know, this thing.
Oh, wonderful.
So, and it's on vinyl, but you can get it on Apple iTunes and all of this, whatever, Spotify, all those things. But so I spent a lot of time just doing that and working on my own projects, stuff that have been just piling up over the years that I never had time to do because I was always working on, all of the things that I have been working on. So in that sense, it was kind of a nice little break to sort of recenter myself and do the things that I kind of personal projects that I had to put aside for other things. But now that we're sort of back into the swing of things, or starting to get back into the swing of things slowly but surely, all of those films that were supposed to have been done last year now got pushed into this year on top of all of the films that are supposed to be from this year. So this year is proving to be quite a busy, crazy a year. But all good things and all things that I love working on. So no complaints.
How many days of the week are you in studio, or are you still doing a lot from home? Or
I almost do everything from here, other than, when we go to record with the orchestra, that's when I leave, and we go, because you have 100 people, and 100 people aren't going to fit here in my studio. But even then, we haven't been able to do that to any great extent. I did just finish recording Jurassic World. We recorded that in London, but we did it like this, over Zoom, and we had a feed coming in so that I could hear it in super high quality, and I could talk to the booth and talk to the players, and if I needed to change things, we could do that. But it was pretty time consuming. A film like that would normally take us, say, 5 days to record. This took us around 12 days to do because you couldn't have the entire orchestra in the room. You could only do sections at a time because of COVID protocols and all of that. And so we wanted to try and be as safe as we can, but we got it done. It just took a lot longer, than you normally would. So we're sort of moving into the next projects, trying to figure out, is it going to be like that for the next year, or are we going to start to be able to get people together? I don't know. It's like day at a time, and we'll figure it out. So yeah, so Jurassic World finished. Now moving on to things like Batman and Spider-Man and a few other films that are in the mix and haven't quite fully been announced yet. So yeah, it's kind of nutty.
That's a pretty exciting time, and I know all of us are fans of pretty much every movie you've just named there. So very exciting stuff. Michael, tell us about your early life and how did you get into this? Like, was it always music, or was there other things? Are you a born Star Wars fan, or did?
Yeah, well, I am definitely a Star Wars fan. Actually, the first time I saw Star Wars, I grew up in New Jersey, as you said, and about as far away from Hollywood as you can be in the United States, and so if you wanted to learn anything about how movies were made, you really had to do a lot of research, and you had to go to every bookstore that you could find, and in many cases, the bookstore near your house wasn't the one that was going to have anything about how to make movies, especially if you were making, like, as I was, Super 8 movies, or even before that, regular 8 movies. So you would have to go to Philadelphia or find small, very specialty shops to find any kind of information. Not like today, you could just get on the internet and find out anything you want. So I was growing up in the 70s, and of course, that's when I saw Star Wars. And I was, 9 years old, I think, when I first saw it. I saw it in Cape Cod. We were on a family vacation, and it was one of those days where it was raining, so we couldn't be outside or go to the beach, and so my older brother took me and my younger brother to the movies, and he took us to see Star Wars, and that was the first time I saw it, and I was like, what is that? Oh my gosh. So that quickly became an obsession. Now, it wasn't my first obsession. Obviously, one of my first obsessions was King Kong, which led to all of the Ray Harryhausen movies, because Willis O'Brien, who did all the stop motion on King Kong, then a young Ray Harryhausen worked with him and then went off to do his own thing. So I followed Ray Harryhausen's path quite vociferously as a kid. I loved it. I loved the idea of stop motion and all the creatures that he brought to life. So I that was the first thing I started doing, was just making these stop motion movies. And then, and then Planet of the Apes, was another obsession before Star Wars. Like there was all these like little, like every time something like that would come in, I wouldn't just go in and like it a little bit. I'd go in and like it a lot. I would want to learn everything I could about it and basically live in those worlds. So, and then from Planet of the Apes, what led me to Star Trek, which I absolutely love Star Trek, and the Twilight Zone and all of those things. So naturally, when Star Wars came out, it was a no-brainer that I was going to fall all over it and allow it to sort of engulf me the way it did. So, and I still, back in that cabinet over there, all the toys that I had as a kid growing up, all my Star Wars toys are there, all of that. So, no, music wasn't the beginning for me. Music was sort of a side thing that was secondary to what I wanted to do, which was just make movies. And where music came in was like, once I would make a movie, I would like, all right, it needs music, and I would have to go and find the right music. And in those days, trying to add music to a silent movie is very difficult, especially if you wanted that music to change and shift in tone with the story that you were trying to tell. And of course, my stories were about guys going into space, landing on another planet, getting eaten by dinosaurs that they come across, and things like that. And so, but I always liked it when, in a movie, when the tone changed or something happened in the movie, the music changed too, and it really followed along with the story. And I was really sort of insistent that the music in my movies did that too. So it was a lot of figuring out, how do I edit sound and music together on a cassette tape, and it was almost impossible. But I figured out ways to do it. And if I started this and that at the same time, it would generally line up enough to satisfy me and my 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, brain. So that was really the beginning of my interest in music, was how it sort of affected picture. What happens when you put music to picture, how that helps you tell the story. And I just kept getting more and more obsessed with soundtracks and classical music and jazz, anything that was instrumental in nature. It didn't need to be, it wasn't necessarily, I wasn't really into, at the time, rock music or popular music. I was really into, I was a weird kid. I was listening to marching band music and John Philip Sousa, and I was listening to 30s jazz, Django Reinhardt, and I was listening to, Jerry Goldsmith and John Williams and Max Steiner and all of these guys, So I just loved the sound of when a group of musicians were playing together. So that's sort of where it all sort of formed in this weird bubble, And on top of that, I would go and I would sneak my tape recorder into movie theaters and record the films so that I could listen to them. As a kid, I'd listen to them at night. I mean, because once it was out of the theaters, there was no way to see it again. I mean, that was it. Today, it doesn't really matter if you miss it. You're going to see it a couple of weeks later, wherever you want, and that's good and bad. But at the time, that you had to find ways to keep these things in your life, and for me, it was recording the audio, which also taught me to really listen to how the sound worked. It wasn't, because when you're just listening to a cassette tape, there's no picture. You're just listening to the sound. So it really drilled into my head how sound and music work together to help tell a story, which was, and that was really the genesis of all of it for me, way back then in New Jersey. And that's how I spent almost every waking day of my childhood. When I was in school, it was always looking at the clock, waiting for 3 o'clock. There's no, then I knew I was free to do what I wanted to do. And when I could, I would include it into whatever projects I was doing at school, So if we had a book report, I would do a book report on, well, I have one, if you want to hear that we can, so this is a book report that I did you were supposed to read a book, pick a book, read it, and then write a report about it. But I was like, I don't feel like writing a report, but maybe I could use my tape recorder and the music that I have and sort of do it in a different way. So here's this.
My next book report is Star Wars, written by George Lucas. Luke Skywalker was a 20-year-old farm boy who lived and worked on his uncle's farm on the remote planet of Tatooine, and he was bored beyond belief. He yearned for adventure among the stars, adventures that would take him beyond the farthest galaxies to the distant and alien worlds. But Luke got more than he bargained for when he found a message from a princess held captive by a dark and powerful Darth Vader. Luke didn't know who she was, but he knew he had to save her, and soon, because time was running out. Armed only with...
Yeah, time was running out. And if you're a real Star Wars fan and you know this book, you know that I was probably just reading the back of the synopsis. So I probably didn't get a very good grade on that report because it wasn't really totally in my words. But it was certainly more fun than sitting there typing out a whole report. So, that was, the way I sort of just grew up, was sort of revolving all of those things that I loved, trying to wrap them into my everyday life and school and all of that. But it was a weird education for me, and I didn't even know it was going to be an education. It was just doing it because I loved it.
Yeah. I mean, it's awesome because I think a lot of us started the exact same way, and it ended up in all the different places that it brought us to career-wise and influence-wise. So how did your career start to take off, and where did it all come together after school?
Well, in high school, I continued making movies. I and I got more ambitious with the movies that I was making. They started out as little 3-minute films, and then as I got older, they started getting into 8 minutes, and then there was a 30-minute one which I did, about two kids that fall asleep and wake up after a sort of a nuclear holocaust to find that their neighborhood is gone, and it's sort of populated by these weird deformed creatures, and they end up freeing them from some guy who has sort of taken over and enslaved them all. It's sort of a weird thing. And then that led to, we were like, well, if we can do a 30-minute, let's do an hour-long one. So, there was one called Taking Care of Business, which was sort of an adventure, sort of treasure map type of thing, and that was an hour long. And that was in high school. So in high school, I realized that, I really I wanted to do two things. I wanted to study music and I wanted to study filmmaking. But, the school, I applied to two schools, School of Visual Arts in New York and to Cal Arts in California. And I did not get accepted into Cal Arts. And Cal Arts is where you can study both film and music, whereas School of Visual Arts just had a film program. They had an animation program. It was more about the visual arts. So I ended up going to the School of Visual Arts, which was one of the best things that could have happened to me. I loved it there so much. And I studied film, and then I studied music on the side. I would take private lessons with whoever I could find to continue sort of learning piano and sort of any sort of theory that I could. And it was really just a mishmash of things. And I graduated from college and right to work for Universal Pictures in their publicity department, and then shortly after that moved over to Disney, to their publicity department. And while I was there, I started then sort of taking more serious music classes at Juilliard, which was not far away. This was in New York City. They had Disney had an office there, and that's where I was working. So for about a year, I took classes at Juilliard. And then that led me, Disney asked if I wanted to move out to California to work on the studio lot. And I was like, yes, of course. So I moved out to California, continued taking classes at night at UCLA. And that's just sort of how I started learning. And then opportunities started sort of coming up, weird little things where, they were doing these sort of promotional commercials for movies in the marketing department. And I, sort of in the department that I was working in. And they needed music for them. And I said, hey, could I submit something? And they were like, well, we have our vendors that we use and all of that. But sure, if you want to submit something, why not? So I submitted something, and they ended up choosing mine to do this little 30-second commercial, this piece of music. I remember getting paid, I think it was $2,000. And, $2,000 was like at that time, somebody just handed me $1 million. You know, it was like, that was a big deal. So, you know, that was a sort of officially my first paid gig. And then I got a job. My story goes all over the map. Then I got a job. I saw something opened up at Disney Interactive, and they were hiring producers. So I got a job as an assistant producer in that department. And while there, you know, we're working on all these video games, and of course they all need music. And they knew, as I got to know everyone there, they get to know me. They know that I write music. They asked me to set up a small music studio in the interactive division, which I did. And then they just said, "Hey, could you write music for this thing? We need this." And they just kept asking, you know, and that led to, you know, me just doing more and more work in video games. And eventually, sort of, I ended up quitting, you know. Again, the next step was moving over to DreamWorks Interactive. Steven Spielberg, David Geffen, and Jeffrey Katzenberg started DreamWorks, and I started my own animation company. So yes, I also had an animation company in addition to all of this other stuff, which they funded my animation company. And what we did was we were there at the very beginning of DreamWorks, and we were helping them come up with ideas of what they were going to be doing, what they were going to be making. We were coming up with ideas for TV shows, for films, for video games, whatever. And we ended up making a couple games for them. But through that process, again, opportunities arose for me to write music for the Jurassic Park Lost World video game, and that's how I met Steven Spielberg. And he really liked the music I was doing and asked me to work on this other thing called Medal of Honor, another video game. And what was great about these was he was insistent that we use live players, live orchestra. Everything up to that point that I had done had been, you know, synth, because that's all I could afford or deal with. And I certainly wasn't getting hired to do projects that had a budget for that. But these, he insisted on it because that's sort of what he knows. And thank God he did, because I feel like that first stepping in with the orchestra for me was a big, big turning point, you know. And once Lost World happened, I was like, oh, wow, I really love this so much. And I sort of made the decision at that point to just quit producing the games and just do music. And I said, you know, if I were to leave and just work at home, would you guys consider contracting me to do music when and if you need it? And they were like, absolutely. So that sort of led to me doing a bunch of the Medal of Honor games, which J.J. Abrams played, you know, unbeknownst to me. I didn't know who he was. You know, he just emailed me out of the blue one day, said, hey, because I had this little janky website at the time, and it had samples and stuff, and you could email me. So he went to my website and he emailed me and said, hey, my name's J.J. Abrams. I wrote Armageddon and regarding Henry. I'm about to do this new TV show for ABC. Would you want to come in and meet and talk about it? He goes, I love the Medal of Honor music. I was like, okay. So I went in, met with them, and we just hit it off. And then from there, life sort of went nuts, you know, into all those other things, because it was, you know, Brad Bird had watched Alias, which got me into Pixar, you know, and it, you know, it's you really have this revelation that whatever it is you do, don't half-ass it, because you never know who's going to see it or who's going to be listening or watching it. And not that I ever would half-ass it, but I know sometimes there's a tendency, it's like if you get tired of something and you're kind of like, I'll just do the least amount of work possible. But, you know, I was never like that. I always wanted things to be as big and as good as they could be. And I feel like that sort of translated somehow into the work, and they felt that because they're very similar people, you know, Brad and JJ. And that's just where it went. And then from there, it was just like all bets were off. It was crazy. It was just sort of like, you know, and I did choose to stay with certain people along the way. I didn't just take any job that came, because, you know, I still wanted to make sure the things I was working on were things that I cared about, things that I loved, things that meant something to me, with people that I liked working with, you know, because you can get into this business, just take anything, but you're generally not happy, because you're really rolling the dice. So I was very careful about the things I chose from the very beginning. And I've been very lucky to say that I have loved every second of it. It's been really fun so far. So hoping it's not done yet. We'll see. You never know.
We're hoping it's not done either, for sure. So jumping from that, I mean, we're celebrating 50 years of Lucasfilm here. So of course, us as all these big Star Wars fans, we've got so many questions about that world of things. And one of the main things people always talk about when we're talking with other people involved in these films and involved in the saga is this responsibility of Star Wars. It's this huge thing. It's a family affair. It's been around for a long time. So when you got that call about Rogue One, doing the score for that, how did you feel?
Well, I had just come off of a really hard run of movies that were sort of one against the other. And I was about to have, for the first time in a long time, a break between projects. And me and my partner, Andrea, we were going to go on a vacation, and we were very excited about this, you know. And as we were sitting there looking at where we were going to go and what we were going to do, the phone rang, and it was my agent, and he said, "Hey, are you sitting down?" And I'm like, "Well, no." And he goes, "Well, maybe sit down. I just want to ask you something." I'm like, "Oh man, what are you going to do?" And he said, "Kathy Kennedy called and was interested if you would be, interested in talking to her about working on the new Star Wars film." And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Yep." And I was like, and I remembered like telling Andrea, just close the computer because we're not going to go anywhere. We're not going to, and he said, the only thing is, you have, I mean, if you decide to do it, you have like 4.5 weeks to write the thing, which didn't bother me at all because I was used to writing very quickly, working on Lost and Alias, and you get used to doing that, and so I was like that part didn't bother me. It was more the part of, wow, this is Star Wars, it's a big deal, and this is something that is, and this film in particular was something that was so tightly tied to the original trilogy, which is like I love so much. When I say original trilogy, it means 77 onward. So I know there's all different ways to call things now, and I always get confused. But so I was just like, yes, of course, I will absolutely go and talk to whoever. And so I ended up in London, and I ended up meeting with Gareth Edwards, with Tony Gilroy, with John Gilroy, the editor, with John Finkley, the music editor, and they said, "Hey, why don't you come over to the set?" So I went over to the set, and I was like thinking, this is just insane, because there I was on the set of this thing, and what they were shooting that day was the scene where Darth Vader comes into the blockade runner and is just, tearing everyone apart bit by bit. So not only did I get to walk the set and get to go on that and see, I mean, then I got to see Darth Vader doing his thing, which was, really amazing. I mean, it's also kind of funny as well, because when you're just on set watching them film, there's no special effects, no sound or anything. It's just a guy in a suit, waving his thing, and sparks are flying here and there. So there's a funny aspect to it as well. But, when it's finished and done and you add everything you add, that's when it becomes what it is. But I remember just thinking, this is crazy. So, but of course I said, sure, I'll do it. Why not? And, but so it was, I didn't get caught up too much in the like, oh my God, it's Star Wars, because you really can't. You have to just go, all right, what's the job I have to do? Let me see the film. Let me figure out what would be best for this movie, and just get out of my way so I can finish this in time for you to have it for your dub, because there was just so little time to do it. And I think that was actually great, because they just gave me a tremendous amount of freedom to do what I wanted to do. And it was an enormous amount of trust that they gave me, which I'm thankful for. And I just had a blast. And every time it was sort of like, I'd be halfway through the day and go, man, I still have so much left to do in this film. I would look up at the screen that I was working, and there was like stormtroopers running around. And I was thinking like, come on, this is great. There's nothing bad about this situation at all. This is pretty awesome to get to do this. And I mean, yeah, it was slightly intimidating being one of the first people kind of coming in and doing a Star Wars score that was not John Williams. You know, I mean, John is John, and he sort of, you know, set the whole tone and template for what Star Wars is. But I also knew that I needed to bring something of me into it so that it wasn't just a copy paste type of thing. You know, I have a real visceral reaction to when I see films that are basically, you know, there's fan service and then there's fan service. Like, and there's ways to make people happy with the nostalgia and all that. But there's also ways to just sort of do that and yet not bring anything new to the table. And I feel like, you know, we all go to these things. We want that bit of nostalgia. We want that, what we loved of it, but you also need to have something new brought to you, you know? So for me, the most, I guess, the hardest part was going, how am I going to bring something new to this that, you know, and I do feel like the short timeline helped that just happen on its own, you know? So yeah, and it was just, in the end, it was just a blast. And to be on stage recording with the musicians and all of that, we just had such a great time. I brought all my Star Wars figures with me to the scoring stage, you know, and had them up there on the counter. I actually think I have this photo here of this right there. You know, and that, you know, that
Incredible.
As you remember, like that, and that's the mail-in thing that you had to get, which was, you know, when Star Wars came out, they really didn't know, as you know, they didn't know it was going to be a big movie. They didn't prepare to have action figures and all of this stuff. So that first Christmas, the only thing they really had for sale was this mail-in card. You could just, you know, it was an envelope, you know, and it promised you figures at some later date. So I remember getting that envelope, and even though there were no action figures or anything, I remember it was the most exciting thing, knowing that at some point in the next few months, I'm going to be receiving these action figures, you know, and it came with the stand, and you could collect them on, put them on there, and it was pretty great. So, you know, while I'm not a huge collector of sort of new Star Wars toys, new things, the things that I do hold dear and keep with me are the things that I had as a kid. So I have every one of my Star Wars toys, all of the different action figures, all of that I still have with me, and that's the stuff that I like the most.
It's great. And so the next question I have here is perfect transition from that. One of the greatest things about the Rogue One score that you worked on is how many references it has to A New Hope and to the other soundtracks that exist. And you already touched on it a little bit. But when you're using motifs like Leia's motif or the Force theme, or even the original Darth Vader motif, how did you balance, you know, using those things and making your own? You only have 4 weeks to make these kinds of decisions. So do these things kind of just flow out of you from your experience, or what?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it, that it's really just a gut instinct. I mean, you know, when you're doing anything creative, it's always just like a best guess, right? No, there's no science to it. You're guessing, you know, and you're hoping, and everyone has their own way of guessing. But for me, you know, when you use something like that, I knew I wanted to do the Death Star theme, you know, and I knew I wanted to bring in the original sort of Imperial motif that was, you know, attached to Darth Vader from A New Hope. And, you know, because those sort of disappeared after a while, which I understand for the Death Star motif, because I got blown up, so we're not gonna play that. But here we are, we had it again, and you know, sometimes they'll play these old themes in these newer movies, but they're not attached to what's really happening story, or they're just like, oh, it's a well-known piece of music, so let's put it here. And I'm for me, I mean, you know, everyone can do it however they want to do it. For me, I would not want to do that, because I know how important for me music is to telling the story. So if the music has nothing to do with the story, then you better not, you know, reference something that has nothing to do with what you're watching. That's my rule, you know, just for me. I know everyone, like I said, has a different way of doing it, and that's fine. But for me, I knew here we are going to have Darth Vader. I was like, oh, I'm going to use to bring that back and use that because I always loved it, you know? And I was like, whatever happened to that? So it was really selfishly being brought back, but in a way that really tied into the storytelling. You know, I would, if Darth Vader were not in this, I never would have used it. Like, I never would have brought back that theme unless there was a reason to bring it back. And this movie gave me these great little reasons to bring back things that sort of hadn't been used or hadn't been heard in a long time. And that really made sense to use within the boundaries of the story that was being told. So, you know, there is, you know, you could argue that, you know, and there was a lot of discussion about this. You could argue that bringing the Imperial, you know, the newer Imperial theme, you know, Darth Vader's theme or the Imperial March, playing that is, you could argue, should I have done that? Should I have not done that? You know, I don't know, because it didn't really exist until Empire, right? So, but, you know, I you know, that was a discussion I would have with the filmmakers, and you know, part of me was like, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. And they're like, yeah, but people really want to hear, you know, and, you know, I'm like, all right, well, let me find a way to do it that's not just sort of, you know, a rubber stamp of what was, and maybe we can do it in a way that feels different. You know, like when he's in the hallway slaughtering those guys, that's Darth Vader's theme playing. That's the, you know, but it's played very slow. And I noticed that people caught on to that, and on YouTube and stuff, they've sped it up and go, look, it's Darth Vader's theme, you know. But but doing things like that, I love finding ways to bring them in and sort of weave it in a really fun and organic way that ties to what the story is. But yeah, you know, the fact of where that film lies in the timeline of Star Wars was such a gift in terms of being able to do those fun things, which I think I'll never forget. I had a friend of mine, Rich Moore, and Rich Moore was one of the directors on Zootopia. He was over at my house for dinner one night, and I was like, do you want to see a little bit of the new Rogue One? He was like, what? Yes, because he's like a super Star Wars nerd. And so he came up to the office, and I showed him the scene, you know, when basically when Tarkin comes in and they see the Death Star, and they start talking about this. And, you know, and he, as soon as he heard the Death Star motif, he jumped off the sofa and was just like, that's the Death Star motif. Oh my God, my brother's going to lose his mind. Like, he started talking, like he turned into like a 10-year-old kid immediately. And I was like, yes, that's exactly how I felt, like, you know, being able to do that. And that's where, you know, and it worked great, because it was like, it was the Death Star. It wasn't being played against some other unrelated moment, you know? Yes. So, yeah, it was just one of the most fun things I got to do. And working with Kathy I've always had an amazing time working with her. I loved it. The whole team there is just great.
Yeah. And speaking of other big decisions, momentous decisions, I would argue, I believe this was the first movie without the crawl and the blast, right? I believe. Yes. So what was that kind of discussion about? That was such a big buzz in the Star Wars community. Like, it's not going to have a crawl. What are we going to do?
Yeah, I know. You know, in some ways you can't win. There's nothing you can do. No matter what choice you make, there's going to be a large group of people that absolutely disagree and are going to let you know very loudly that they don't like it. So especially with something like Star Wars, which has such a wide fan base. But, you know, I think at the time, thinking of this, you know, because they were trying to figure out, what is this? It's not part of the trilogy. So that idea of coming up with a Star Wars story or something like that, it's sort of these in-between moments within the history that we already know. You know, what was that? And we felt that the trilogy films really owned that whole crawl thing. And I there was a feeling that, you know, it just felt wrong doing the crawl for this. It was like, okay, well then how are we going to start this? And I mean, there was an idea to start it with just, you know, the B flat chord that sort of, you know, just bam, you know, that whole thing, and just have it go bam and then fade away into nothing, you know. But that almost, in the end, felt it like kind of mean. You know, so you know, we had. I remember talking with Gareth and just like, well, let's just do like this crazy, like the ugliest sort of like what kind of a thing that we can figure out and just open on space and see what happens, you know? And we did that, and that seemed to work just as well, you know? And I do think, you know, once the film starts, you quickly forget that there was no crawl. You forgive it very quickly, you know? And I think it was the right way to open that movie, you know? Who knows? Again, everything's a best guess. Nobody knows anything. Everyone's just trying to make something good. That's all, you know. And you can't please everyone. But yeah, so that was a big decision to make.
So a fun thing that I want everyone, and we talked about this before last time we talked with you, but one of my little favorite things about your soundtracks are the pun titles that you put on all these tracks. I love that.
Yeah.
And last time we were talking, I was asking you, you know, what happened? The Rogue One soundtrack doesn't have it, but you corrected me. Is that right?
It does have it. Yeah, they do have their own titles. You know, we were on the dub stage after everything had been recorded, and we were mixing down the whole film, and we had to come up with titles for the CD and the album and all that stuff. And, you know, our titles were as they always are, you know, and when I say our, I mean, you know, my music editors, because this really started with them, my music editors, specifically Steve Davis. And Steve Davis and I started on Alias. And, you know, he would just get bored titling things like, all right, hallway chase, and, you know, whatever, Sydney drives a car, anything, you know, it was all just like, so he started doing these very funny things, and it became this sort of a contest or so between us all, and we would all, whoever could come up with the best title for a cue, that won. And, you know, a lot of times it was Steve that won, and mainly, you know, both because he was great at it or because I just didn't have time to think that because I was writing the music, you know, but we just kept doing it over the years for every film. And when it came to Star Wars, I was thinking, are they going to let us do this? Because, you know, all of the other Star Wars soundtracks have been so sort of like buttoned up and very nice and neat and everything, you know.
Qui-Gon's
sounding,
no end.
Yeah, sounding so official, you know. And I was just like, well, let's see. So, you know, when we were recording, they were labeled the way we wanted them labeled. But when we got to making the soundtrack, you know, we were like, Kathy, is this gonna? She's like, I was like, okay, how about this? I said, what if we do this? What if on the inside cover, you know, we put our titles as the alternate titles for anyone who's a fan, like they can then rename their iTunes playlist whatever they want, you know, they can use this, you know. So on the outside cover, you have the sort of official, you know, necktie covers is what I like to call them, and then titles, and then on the inside you have our titles. So yeah, so you can, it's your choice to do as you wish with those titles. But yeah, they're there. We just had to put them on the inside this time. And that's the only time we've ever had to do that, you know. But I understand, you know, and, you know, you want these things to kind of fit into a certain library type of feel. So, you know, whatever. So
I was just super glad to see that they were still there.
Yes.
That made me so happy.
Yeah, they exist.
So Michael, a lot of people, you know, in the Star Wars community feel that Rogue One is possibly the best Star Wars out there. My wife and I, after our last meeting, were on a podcast, and you know, the topic of the podcast was bring your top 3 favorite songs or themes from Star Wars movies, and talk about them and why they're so special to you. And I can tell you, every single person on the panel had a theme from Rogue One.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it was nice, unsolicited, and amazing. And you know, mine happened to be "Your Father Would Be Proud of You," I think is the title. Which honestly ranks as one of my top favorite themes in all of Star Wars. My wife's was the Master Switch, because in that movie, she's of half Asian, and so, you know, so the two characters really resonated with her in film. Yep. And then there were others that had other themes. How do you feel being part of such an integral part of the success of Rogue One?
It makes me very happy, actually. You know, when I do hear people say that Rogue One is their favorite of the Star Wars movie, that makes me very happy, because, you know, our intent from moment one was to make something that was sort of built off of our love of what this was, of what this, to give back what this gave us in some way. So what you're really experiencing in this movie is a lot of people who are just giving back, all of the love that they got from Star Wars over the years. They're giving it back to a whole new audience. And I think when you do that honestly and truthfully, it resonates, and none of us were in this in a cynical way. None of us were in this just because it was a job. It was something we would have done, don't tell anyone, probably for free. But, and it was, and even then, there wasn't as much Star Wars out as there is now. Now we have the TV shows and all of this stuff happening. But then this was like I say then as if it was 100 years ago, but it was something very special, and we all felt that way. And I know for me personally, it was a true reflection of just sort of my childhood. And I feel like I think it was my brother Anthony was just like, oh, come on, it shouldn't have been that hard for you to write that score in 4.5 weeks. You've been writing that score all your life, meaning it was just sort of percolating in my head. Oh, what would you do if you ever got a Star Wars movie? And not that I physically wrote any themes down or anything, but it's just, the mental prep you do over the years, you don't even realize. So it makes me very happy to hear that when people say it's their favorite or amongst their favorites. It's hard for me to judge the work that I do. The only way to do that is, to hear comments from people out in the world like that, and that's really nice.
We thank you for it. You touched earlier that you have an amazing relationship with J.J. Abrams and, that start of things. Has that led to any cool, interesting experiences on the sets of Star Wars?
Well, yeah, and I'm sure some people are like pointing to the corner of my screen going, oh, look, that's probably his red helmet. Isn't that one when, yes. So yes, I did get to play these guys in we'll raise them up there. You know who these are. So I did get to play stormtroopers in Force Awakens. I got to play FN 3181. And then I don't think my guy in the final film got a name. I don't think so. But I don't know. Maybe we can have a contest. We can think of a name. But yeah, being able to actually be on set in a stormtrooper outfit, is the greatest thing in the world. And this one in particular, for the Rise of Skywalker, I was on set during the big final battle on the top of the Star Destroyer thing, and everyone's running around and there's all this stuff going on. But I remember they attached, this is the helmet I had on set too, and they attached an explosive to the side of it, because I was supposed to get hit in the head, boom, and the thing goes off. So I got the whole experience on that one where I got to actually, be fired, and it was Finn who ends up, I think, killing me in that film. So this guy didn't quite survive. I like to think that FN 3181 is still out there somewhere, roaming the outer rim. Maybe he's got his own little tiki bar out there somewhere, and he's just sort of kind of given up and found a new life that is more peaceful and tranquil than the one he was in. But yeah, this was fun because I got to arrest Poe. Oh
wow.
Yeah, so in the scene in the very beginning of the movie when the stormtroopers bring him to Kylo Ren, that I'm the trooper that throws him down on the ground and says, and I'm the guy that frisks him when he says frisk him, I frisk him, which is silly because as a stormtrooper, if he had anything on him, I never would have known it because I couldn't tell what the heck I was doing. You just but it looks good on screen, and it was. Oh, and I also got to play this. I played the same character in 2 movies. I got to play him in Wreck-It Ralph 2, in Ralph Breaks the Internet. Is that what it's called? Yeah. So I played the same, and I'm credited with the same name in that movie as well. But of course, I play one of the stormtroopers that stops, what's her name, the little girl in the movie, and ask her if she has if she's carrying around some pop-up ads or something, and I'm like, do you have a permit for that? And so that's me. I got to play him in that one too. So yeah, so those kinds of things are the best, and it's a little, you could argue, oh, come on, isn't it enough that you're writing the music for these things? You get that, what, you got to be just take that over too. But yes, I do, and it was really fun. So.
Awesome. Well, before we have an hour, so before we wrap it up, we want to ask some quick fun questions.
Okay.
So, and because we're celebrating 50 years of Lucasfilm, which is hard to believe, but we are, we're going to put you right on the spot, and I'm going to ask you, absolute favorite Lucasfilm movie.
I'm just gonna go with A New Hope because that was the one that sort of just like I for many reasons. A was probably as a kid that was the one that sort of blew my mind, and B, I absolutely love the. I'm a huge visual effects artist fan, a special effects artist fan. I love all of that. I love miniatures and all of those things, and I feel like with the technology they developed to do that movie, that was an incredible achievement, what had to be done. Because when you look at other movies that came out at the same time, other science fiction movies, we won't name them, but if you look at them, they are miles apart in terms of what the effects look like. And even if they didn't touch things up or do special editions like they do now, I mean, those effects from that original one really hold up. And I have such respect for the people that were there down on the ground trying to figure out how to do this. In fact, just this morning I was looking at someone's post, and they had a bunch of behind the scenes shots of when ILM used to be in Van Nuys, which isn't far from here. That whole end Death Star battle, all of the exteriors of the Death Star and the ships blowing up, that was all done in the parking lot. And I was just looking through all these photos, some of which I had seen before, some of which I hadn't. And I always wish that I could have been there for that, to see that kind of that puzzle solving that must have happened to make that film come to life. Because without that crew, without that special effects crew, that film could have been something very different. So for that alone, I just love what I will call the first Star Wars movie.
That's Star Wars.
Yeah, it's just Star Wars. Exactly. I love that.
All right. Further on the spot, other than Rogue One, what is your favorite piece of Lucasfilm music?
Well, I'm gonna group it into the entire Empire Strikes Back soundtrack. I mean, it's very hard because I love the New Hope as well. I love Star Wars. I love that original one so much. But I remember getting the second one, and they decided, and I was just like, wow. And that was like the perfect, you have Star Wars, and then Empire came, and Empire had all of this new material in it, and it touched on some of the things that the previous one brought up, but it didn't overuse them. And it just gave you all this new stuff. And that's probably where my philosophy about all of this sort of was born, because I remember that so much coming out. And of course, the asteroid chase is like one of the quintessential, pieces of music.
My favorite
picture.
Piece, by the way.
Yeah. So I mean, that music to that sequence is a sort of masterclass. And all right, here's how you do it. And it's just so great. And I also love, again, in the original one, all the Tatooine music. It's very hard to decide, go either way, but somewhere in that world, those are the greatest. Yeah.
And the last question, and it's somewhat off topic, but on topic for us. If you were going to make a bad guy doing good costume for the 501st, what costume would you want to make to wear and troop in?
Oh, a bad guy doing good costume of one of these existing. I guess what you mean by bad guy. I mean, bad guy is a gray area, right? I mean, is Boba Fett a bad guy? I don't know. Like he's doing his job. I don't know. I think bad guy doing good. I think people or Jawas bad.
It's a perfect costume.
I like Jawas are the coolest. Although I wouldn't make a very good Jawa. I'm too big, but I always loved them. I love that design. I have to say, again, as a kid, we called them Sand People, Tusken Raiders. That whole, something like that. I really absolutely love the Tusken Raider outfit. That design is incredible. So I'm gonna go with that.
Perfect.
Great choice. And they did so much with them in The Mandalorian. It's like it's
Yeah,
a whole new
that was
life
kind
now.
of fun to see more of them in that. Absolutely, yeah. I just thought that's such a brilliant design. Yep.
Well, great. I believe that's all the questions we have for you today. So thanks so much for joining us for this awesome Lucasfilm celebration.
Absolutely, it was so much fun. Thanks for having me. Anytime.
Of course. So this entire weekend, the 501st Legion is raising money for First Robotics, which is an organization that's focused on promoting the interest of STEM learning. I myself was a part of First Robotics when I was in high school, so I'm super happy that we're supporting this amazing cause and that it's absolutely worth supporting. So everybody who's watching at home and abroad, please check out the links provided, and we always appreciate the support from you.
Michael, thank you again for talking to us today. Truly a pleasure. May the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you. We'll see you again.
Thank you.
Take care.